Hello Pod, Anthony Teasdale here. Just wanted to let you know in this episode we're joined by our colleague Jo Fullmer, LCSW, and Jo is in a location outside, so you may hear some background noises coming just because she joined us from being outside at another home because of some internet connectivity issues. So any background noises you hear, that's what's going on in the background. So look forward to you listening to this episode of the podcast. Here's Feeling Seen, a UNC CAPS podcast. It's Dr. Anthony Teasdale.
And I'm Dr. Erinn Scott, clinical psychologist at CAPS. And we are so excited today to have with us our colleague, Jo Fullmer. Jo, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here and to talk with both of you. I'm Jo. I'm a clinical social worker at CAPS. I've been at CAPS, I think this is my 5th year, or going into my 5th academic year. And I was in practice before being at CAPS. I worked primarily in community mental health settings, but had done my practicum at UNC CAPS and knew that I wanted to get back to college counseling. So I was kind of always looking for an opportunity to do that. And actually a temp position came up, and I quickly got in there and was able to stay on and become a permanent staff member. So I really just love working at CAPS and wearing different hats and doing group and doing individual work and working with awesome colleagues. So I just feel appreciative for all the different things we get to do. And
Yeah. So can you tell us more about that? What drew you back? What drew you into college mental health? What drew you back to that?
Yeah. Well, I can go a little further back and just think about social work, because I think I'm a social worker before I'm a therapist, and that still feels true, even though therapy is what I really love to do. Social work is first for me. And when I was in college, I always thought that I was going to do like policy work after college. I majored in political science and had a minor in social justice, and thinking about like social justice issues at a policy level, I kind of thought that was where I was headed. And I was going to DC after college to do a service year at a large nonprofit there that serves mostly poor folks, minoritized individuals who need access to lots of different services. So I worked at this awesome place called Bread for the City that has a medical clinic and a legal clinic, a social services department, a food pantry, a housing program. So all these kind of different things in one place. And I worked in social services there. And my thought was, I feel like a lot of maybe college students and certainly 22-year-old people think like I'm going to get some on the ground experience and then I'm going to like go on. So I thought I would get into policy work, but I loved my supervisors and the social workers I was working with. They were so down to earth, and they were so real. And I learned quickly how much I preferred to work with people, and that the relationship piece was so important. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to do social work, whether that's here or somewhere else. And I ended up staying on there as a staff person for a couple of years after my service year. And I actually applied to grad school in DC and was going to go to American University there. And I was actually going to keep working full time to be able to afford grad school. But then my partner had been applying to grad school and got into UNC. So I decided to follow him to North Carolina. And still kind of thought like I was going to do social work and that I was going to do kind of social services level social work. So I just had really loved working with people in that way and helping them get connected to different services. And similar to college counseling, although I didn't know at the time, was wearing different hats, doing different things, going out into the community. I really, really liked it. And I come from a family that service is kind of first and thinking about other people is first. So that was I always knew that I wanted to be in some kind of helping profession, but it started to get, clarified for me that I wanted to be a social worker in DC. So then I took a year to establish residency in North Carolina when Cole and I moved here, and worked overnight at a shelter twice a month. So like 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. to be able to contribute like a couple $100 to the family household. I think I was like covering groceries, and on his stipend, Cole was doing all the other things on his really glorious, grad student stipend while I was establishing residency. And I actually did that through grad school, which was kind of silly. Like, I feel like I was writing these like adult mental health papers at 2 a.m. in the office of this women's shelter, like attuned to every sound. So I did that, and then went to UNC for grad school, and then started to better kind of understand what it means to be a therapist. I'd been in therapy in different points in my life and really gotten a lot out of it, but never really saw myself in that role, or didn't even really kind of understand what the training is for that or what that looks like.
Yeah.
But then had some really cool faculty folks, and then did my prac year at UNC and was hooked with students, hooked with, I just love like identity development, and the kinds of issues that folks are dealing with at this stage of life is so fascinating. So then it's like, I was sunk in and didn't want to leave, graduated, didn't want to leave, and went back to community work for a couple of years and came back.
Awesome. Wow, Jo, that's just such an amazing story. And I really like how even when you were establishing residency, you were doing something that still felt so core to your values and your passion. And I'm curious how, coming from a political science background where advocacy and kind of social justice seemed important to you, have you been able to keep doing those sorts of activities while being a therapist? Have you been able to engage in that work here through CAPS?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Erinn. I think, in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. It's sort of like, I think there are always ways that we can be advocating for our clients and alongside our clients. And I think also doing referral coordination at CAPS helps me to do that, and sort of helping folks get connected to services. I think there's a lot of advocacy in that. And I think that I appreciate the types of social justice conversations and things that happen with clients, and sort of as they're kind of figuring those things out, and who do they want to be in the world, and how do they want to serve. I feel like so many of our students are service oriented. So I think there are ways as a therapist to really do that, and like allowing people to be seen on an individual level sort of helps me think about how people can translate that to feeling seen in the broader world. And that feels like advocacy. And then I'm also like, man, I wish I felt like I had the time or the energy to be like other stuff, whatever, like in the streets, writing the letters, right? Like in college, I was super involved in like voter outreach stuff, and just spent a lot of time doing that. And also in college, I think I thought like, that's what you do. Like, that's kind of all there is, if you can get people to understand the importance of the political process. So I'm appreciative that like the personal is the political, is so much broader for me now than it was then. But I still think about that, and still like, even last night was like looking for, how do I sign up to do some phone banking, and feel like I don't have any bandwidth for it. I'm like 3-hour shifts, and then it said something like, most people sign up for 2 shifts per weekend, and I was like, most people must have nothing else to do. So I'm grateful to have, there are ways that it shows up, I think, in our work and in our clinical work, and in group too. And I think it does kind of flow through.
Yeah, so you teed it right up for me, probably on purpose. All you have to do is start with the G, and I just hear group and start to lose my mind. So you've contributed a lot to CAPS, and I've personally just appreciated getting to interact with you and speak with you, and you bring so much to the table. But I think one of your greatest contributions to CAPS is that you've been the person who started and has been running our Dissertation Support Group. And so you gave me the opening to ask you about that process of how that came to you as a group you saw us having a need for, what the process was like of getting that started, and what it's been like for you to get to facilitate that group over the last couple of years.
Yeah, thanks. groups. We could go on. We could go on about groups.
And we will.
We will, yeah. There's no shortage. We just run through the list. So the dissertation group, when, I don't even know when it was, Anthony, like
Is it 2 years ago?
2
maybe?
years.
Fall, like 2 years.
Yeah.
So 2018 maybe, like fall 2018
so,
maybe. Yeah. So I think there's two pieces. There's a personal piece, which I'll talk about with my husband being a grad student, and then also kind of what we were seeing at CAPS. And I think that my understanding, and I haven't been there that long, but my understanding is that there have been times throughout the years where grad students have expressed interest in more kind of specific support for the PhD process. We certainly know that doctoral students, especially in the later stages, experience imposter syndrome and anxiety and depression at higher rates than the broader student population, and are also less likely to seek support and doing a lot of impression management and feeling like they had to have it all together, and also just being really sort of intellectual and cognitive and sort of, I just got to push through, and maybe not making as much space for their emotions and just other parts of their experience or their life. And I feel like I was hearing that on triage, was hearing that from colleagues, that they had individual clients that were really struggling with really similar concerns, and isolation is so big for folks that are like in their apartment in Carborough, years after having completed their classes, trying to get this dissertation done, and managing maybe lots of other different roles, being parents, maybe having to, work additionally on the side to because the stipend can be so low and it can take folks a long time. So there were all these factors that seemed really, really ripe for a group process, and being able to just connect with people like somebody in the humanities talking to somebody in biology and having such similar experiences. And I think grad students tend to, often feel like they're alone, or they're comparing themselves to other people in their own department and feeling like everybody else has got it together, everybody else is doing well, I'm the only one with this struggle. So it seemed like it was a need. And it also, I was in a place where I wasn't quite sure what groups I was doing. I think I had done an abbreviated self-compassion group, but hadn't done much else in terms of co-facilitating groups. So it was a nice time for me to think about, I knew I really liked group work and how to contribute to that. So that was sort of the piece of it. And I talked with you a lot, Anthony, and with Elizabeth as well, about how to kind of set something like this up and what kind of outreach would be required, and talking with some folks in the graduate school to figure out how to get it off the ground. And it wasn't surprising that it filled easily, and was able to get a number of students interested that first semester.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things about this group is it fills every semester, and it just, like you were saying, it really, to me, it speaks to the core function of group, right? Which is that people often sort of figure they're doing this alone, and then you layer that with the grad student identity and achievement oriented and competition, and you can sort of feel like you're the only one struggling. So we've really benefit from being able to see students go through. You have, I understand, some repeaters sometimes that can come through several times. So, if you're listening to this and this sounds like you, right, you're in that phase. Unfortunately, group is closed for this fall semester 2020, but it is a group that we as CAPS plan on continuing to provide, because it's a need that is really being filled. And again, it speaks to our understanding of how group can really function, which is being connected to others who, like Joe was saying, no matter your department, you're going through similar things. And I also think this is kind of linked to what you were saying earlier, Joe, about like the personal being political. And so I'm curious how you, knowing that your partner was going through and got recently, Cole got his PhD and is doing wonderful things, but just wondering how that was for you to be, helping and sitting with folks who are in something that you were also living or had recently lived. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I remember Anthony and I talking about this a lot right at the beginning, like what was that going to be like, and also me not having a PhD, like, being a therapist but not having gone through this process. And Cole was my case study, or bouncing ideas off of him about like, what do you think about this kind of activity or a conversation, right? And also, of course, I always draw on things that either, usually often things that he has heard, sometimes things he's experienced himself. And I think, for him, I think he was really fortunate to have a pretty decent experience overall, but the sort of the isolation was real, the publication pressure, I think, is huge. And I think at UNC there's a real pressure because it's an R1 university for grad students to be publishing, but they're also teaching, and they're also maybe publishing under different pressures from depending on their advisor and departmental expectations, and it maybe isn't necessarily what they're passionate about or wanting to do, and maybe they're not planning on working at an R1 institution or getting a tenure track job. So there's all these different layers. And so it was interesting for me. I think it was only helpful. There were times when I was worried about it, like, what's this going to be like, that I'm spending, this time supporting this group of students who I can really relate to what's going on for them, especially folks that were later staged and partnered and maybe thinking about family and stuff like, stuff that was happening in our house. But he still super helpful in terms of bouncing ideas off of, and he's got some one-liners that I've used, and I've told small pieces of his story without saying they're his.
Yeah.
Cole has a great story of he had submitted a paper for peer review and I think he had already had one publication, and when it came back, the reviewer, he's anonymous, the reviewers are anonymous, and one of the reviewers had said that this person really needs to consider Harvey's argument from 2017. So they were telling him to consider his own argument from a previous paper, but they didn't know that it was him. So, that's interesting. So sometimes I tell that story in group, just about the randomness of like what gets accepted. And yeah.
I'll consider my own thoughts that I had 2 years ago on this subject. Yep.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah, let me make sure I weave those in. So it's been good. It's been helpful, and he's super supportive, and has he's excited that it happened. So,
Yeah, I'm really glad we're able to offer the group, both because Erinn was talking about it, it's filled and right now and it has been since you started it. So it's been very popular, clearly a need that's been fit. And I think about my own dissertation process, and I did my internship. We do in counseling and clinical psychology in our last year of our doctorate, we have an internship. And so I went off to University of Houston to do mine, and I was all ready to get to work on my dissertation. I got there, I went and consulted with someone in their psych department, and my study was qualitative, so I needed some raters to be on my study and look at the transcripts that I had and do things. And the person I spoke to sort of said, I don't think you'll get anyone to volunteer for this, to be a rater. And I got very deflated in that. And so actually didn't work on my dissertation for quite a few months. And then when I finally got to work on it, I didn't end up finishing by the time I finished my internship. And so I say that and share that just to say there's a lot of bumps in the road and a lot of hurdles to the process of finishing up a dissertation and finishing up a doctorate. And I experienced a few of those, and I imagine Erinn might be able to tell some stories too. And so a group like this is really valuable to help people get past or get over some of those bumps in the road and not get, like I got, a bit dejected and kind of taking in feedback from the wrong source, versus the reality was I had no problem getting people to help me when it came to it. And so a group like this can be really valuable in helping support people through all of those ups and downs in the process and those bumps in the road. For sure. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's amazing how one comment, I think I hear this a lot, right? One comment from an advisor or a peer, what it can really disrupt the process, and especially in dissertation when it can feel so isolated and like I'm creating this new thing. There can be a lot of pressure around it that it can really really throw things off if somebody that inner critic can kick in. I think it can really set people off on a different path. And somebody in group recently, and I've heard this before, a good dissertation is a done dissertation, and trying to help people know that, right? You just have to get it done, and and like make it meaningful to you, right? I feel like it's like, this is your work, having it be meaningful to you, and it can be really hard to quiet the voices. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. One of the things I really like that you touched on with the group composition is that people also can be in this phase of life where, they have this dissertation, this big, huge thing, and they're thinking about other life goals, partnerships, starting a family. And part of why we wanted to have you on today is to talk about parenting. And so want to segue a little bit into that. Groups will come back up because that's an important part of what we talk about. But yeah, I'm thinking about sort of, you and I are both parents and parenting in the time of COVID. And I'm curious, you can both share if things have come up in your group, but also just sort of what this has been like for you and what the challenges are. And Anthony and I will kind of tag you with questions that we maybe have, and I'll jump in as well. But talk to us about, your process with parenting and what comes up for you, whether it's in group or individually with yourself.
Yeah. Oh, parenting in the time of COVID. It's always something, right? At the beginning, I remember my sister lives in Durham and was living with us for a while. And we were in the backyard at the very beginning of COVID. And she said something like, it's so nice that this is happening in the spring because the weather is cool. It's nice to be outside. It's okay to be at home. Who knew it was going to go through all of summer, into fall, into winter, right? It was like, we thought, oh, this is going to be okay. Like, we can be home with Eleanor during the day and do all this stuff outside. And it lasted a lot longer. So remembering that. I also had this plan that lasted for about a week to take a short video every day of the pandemic, but then I realized it was going to last forever. Just sort of about what happened during the day in our house, and I did keep a notebook for a while that I did find helpful of some, because Eleanor's daycare closed, whatever, March 17th there, whatever it all happened, right? There was no more daycare, so I was doing some recording, which was helpful for my own processing, kind of in the beginning when I think so many of us didn't know how to make sense of what was going on, and it feels so drastically different now than it did in March. And so that was kind of fun to write down some things that she was doing. And so at the beginning, I had some gratitude and appreciation for witnessing her development in a different way, being home with her, like live in Durham and drive to Chapel Hill. There were, most days about almost 12 hours that I wasn't with her, and bedtime would come pretty quickly after I got home from work. So in the beginning, and still too, but much more in the beginning, it was really sweet to feel like, okay, this is my primary job. I still have my job, but I've got to take care of my kid and be with her, and there's a gift in that for a while. And just kind of fun to see the day to day and some of the quirks and, on and on. And then daycare was closed for 4 months. So it was a long time, and it was a long time. And Cole was in Wisconsin doing a postdoc, and he had to kind of frantically come back. And so then there were 3 adults and a 2-year-old. Well, she wasn't 2 yet, but she's 2 now, a 2-year-old and 2 dogs and 700 square feet. And everybody was working and living in this small space. So, we tried to see a lot of joy in the fun of it, but man, the stress and the sort of, I don't know how to wear, I still don't know. And maybe it's good that I haven't conditioned to this of like how to effectively feel like I'm at work at my house, and how to totally feel like I'm at home when I'm with her. When now, before the pandemic, I did not have my work email on my phone. I do now, just the lines being blurred.
So blurred.
Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with what you're sharing. And I know, Anthony, you have a godson, and I'm curious what you're hearing about the older kids, because I so much resonate, Joe, with your story, and yeah, trying to find joy in those early moments and then being like, okay, this is going on longer than I thought, and I'm not an educator and I don't have the energy of a 3-year-old. And so I'm not a replacement for her playmates. But I'm curious, Anthony, what has been, what are you hearing about your godson, or what's been the experience of sort of the older kids and managing?
Yeah, so my godson is a high school senior. And so going to be in the college process and interested in places like maybe UNC and some other places. But yeah, what has really been hard for him, he's talked about, is just that period of time through this of just not being able to see friends and get together with people, and not being able to be active outside the home, and so many things we take for granted of what it means to, get to go to school or get to go to the office, and how that shifts what you might be doing, and those divisions that are kind of set up for us between what's home, what's school, what's work. And so that's been really difficult for him, and is the main thing he's talked about, of just almost like a boredom of, I just want to be able to be out there and doing things and be active. And, being young generally, I've come to the theory, watching him grow up, that watching him with his parents was there. I thought he was a well-behaved kid. And it seemed like whenever there was like just little bits of like them being annoyed, it was really just because they couldn't handle that he had so much energy and wanted to talk. And I could just see the adults being like, I've been working all week, can we just have silence? And that can be, I think, hard to navigate. So remembering again that he's still, a teenager, and so has a lot of energy, would like to be with friends, and that's really hard. And I think a lot of our students have experienced that, are experiencing that, of what that's meant to be away from campus and not seeing people, or even to be on campus but be trying to sort of quarantine or stay socially distant, and how it can feel really isolating in that, and you lose a great part of the college experience, which is the social aspect of it. So yeah, that's what I've especially heard from him, is that social aspect of things that's been lost. And he enjoys school, enjoys being at school, and so not having been at school for a good bit of time, and now I think they're back in a staggered way, so not every day, but that was just disruptive as well, was what he's talked about.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think, when this started, I don't know that people were paying as much attention to the mental health of kids. I think we all recognize for us that we're now working from home and we're not seeing our coworkers. There's not a lot of, maybe separation from our work life and our home life. But there was this really precious moment where, my daughter, she's 3, and she was sort of asking, can we go to the beach, and can we go to the park? And she sort of went down all the things that our weekends in the summer typically include, like her dance class and the beach and the park. And we had conversations with her about the coronavirus, not to scare her, but just to give her some context, as much as a 3-year-old can have, about, why things are not happening. And she goes, oh, that's right, the coronavirus. And it was just this really like heartwarming and precious moment of like, they're impacted as well. And I wonder, Joe, if we could speak to a little bit of the pressure to parent, to be like the perfect parent and the perfect worker. And like you were kind of saying, not feeling like you're doing any of that great. And is there some allowance for like good enough? Like sometimes I'm just a good enough employee. I'm getting things done. But if I were in the office, and the days now that we go back one day a week, I do notice I am so much more productive that one day a week. And so, yeah, I want to have you speak to kind of the pressure to parent and to be a worker during this pandemic.
Yeah. Oh, the story of your daughter. I've got friends who have kids that are 3, so older than my daughter, and they call it germ season. And, kids will say, when germ season is over, I'm going to go in your house. It's very clear, but Eleanor's not quite she gets it and loves to wear her mask. Like to leave her mask on at home, in the car, just loves the mask. I don't get it. I'm like, I hate that thing. I want it off my face. But I think that the daycare was calling them superheroes, and and doing some nice, some nice reframing. So maybe she's just feeling like a hero, and she likes that. But it's interesting. There was a period of time when I was feeling really grateful for her being, she turned 2 during this time, for being her age, like, oh, maybe she's not really going to remember it, but now I'm feeling like she's going to remember it. And one of the things that we're noticing is that she's a little bit scared of other people that are not her teacher. Well, she was actually a little scared of her teachers when she went back, but not scared of her regular adults. So that plays into sort of like this pressure to parent. It's trying to figure out like kind of what are the sort of typical developmental things that are going on, and how to be attuned to those, and how they are different because of the pandemic, and sort of what's going to be different for them being 2 and 3 and 4, that age, and what they're going to, how they relate to other people, what feels safe, what feels okay. And my daughter watches a lot of Sesame Street. She didn't watch any Sesame Street before the pandemic. But she watches Sesame Street. She says, talk about my Sessie friends. So we have a ritual, multiple times a day of like how Ernie relates to Bird, and then what Big Bird does, and you have to go in the right order and say the right things, and the whole thing. But it was like letting that happen. Like, it's got to happen, right? Mm-hmm. Like, she's going to have to sit in front of a screen. People have work to do. People have meetings. And also being kinder to myself. There was a dissertation group meeting where Eleanor showed up and popped her face in as we were talking about, I shared this with Anthony. There was a group of all female identified students, none of whom are parents, and we're talking about, when am I going to get to be a parent, because I'm just trying to get my PhD. And then a 2-year-old's face is in the screen, and I'm like, well, dang it. And it was like also some levity, other pieces, right. But like, that kind of letting that kind of stuff happen and just be, and lots more TV time, eating kind of whatever, whenever, and not getting too wrapped up, and trying to pay attention to the, like, okay, she's having trouble relating to people, trying to regulate for myself, like, what am I actually worried about, and what's like, what can we tolerate, what's okay, and I think I am really fortunate that I've got 2 other adults, around to help, and she's back in school, and, my husband, for better or for worse, for a while, his work was not meetings oriented, so he was off and on because I needed to be in places at given times. Mm-hmm. So he was off and on, which helped. But yeah, I feel for people that don't have the same level of support, and I wonder about students. I mean, I haven't talked to any student parents during the pandemic. Like, I haven't gotten a phone screen from a student parent. I haven't talked to, but I really wonder how they're kind of managing that, especially if they've got kids that are also doing school on Zoom, and they're trying to take classes on Zoom, and like, I can't even imagine sort of how to balance that or manage that.
And when you think about the isolation and I agree with you. We haven't seen a ton of student parents, but just thinking about some of the issues that everyone's facing during this pandemic, and then, layering on all of the different stressors, you can imagine that's probably a really vulnerable group. And so again, if you're a student parent listening to this, please feel free to contact CAPS for a phone screen appointment. We have therapists, counselors available to speak with you and support you during this time, and we're all living it too. And Anthony and I talk a lot about, the really difficult thing sometimes as providers, as helpers, is that we're also living this. And so it's important for us to do just what we're doing today, kind of talk to our colleagues and stay connected, because we're the ones that people go to when they need support, and yet we're also feeling isolation, the stress, the role strain. You talked a little bit, Jo, about like, figuring out, this is going to happen. What do I focus on? How much do I tolerate? And I find that that's something that's been really helpful, to kind of let go of some of that inner critic of like, my house is going to be spotless and in ways that when I was going to work and picking up my daughter, there was a little bit more expectation for that. And now it's just like, this is what, it is what it is. Anthony can attest. I was in a meeting with him earlier this week, and we're talking, and it's a pretty serious meeting, and not earth changing, but we're all in and invested. And out of nowhere, my daughter's toy just starts singing, and so I'm like, gotta find that toy and turn it off because it's singing in Spanish and counting, and it was just this moment of like, this is what we're all living through, though, right? Like, we're all in our homes doing the best we can, and so I think there's been a lot of flexibility that I've seen, a lot of allowances for things that typically maybe we didn't, have a lot of room for. Last semester, Anthony and I worked with one of our pre-doctoral interns who was also a parent, and really tried to give permission to like let go of some of the expectation that a 2-year-old is not going to be in your screen, because it's going to happen. You can only do so much. This is unprecedented times. This is not normal. And so we're doing the best we can, but it's not something that any of us were trained in or prepared for. Anthony, what are you hearing or seeing kind of from students thinking about the isolation? I don't know if you have any student parents on your caseload, but even if not, talk to us about what you're seeing with students right now.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'll get to that. I'll just
kind
of continue what you were also mentioning about kind of the intern we had previously, and I think that was a good reminding me of some things because we can get critical of ourselves. We can want to show up very professionally. We can want to do it all in the way we might in a non-pandemic time and give what we would give then. It can be hard we can put more pressure, and it can create even more, just more distress around certain things, because I would notice when kind of that person's child would come into the picture, that brought me joy. I would have a smile on my face. I thought it was adorable. I thought it was fun. It didn't feel super disruptive for me because I think, one, I was sort of like, well, this is what we're living in, so I don't have expectations and I can let that go. So it felt more like a breath of fresh air to see sort of an innocent, adorable kid. But you could also see the pressure for a parent to feel like, I need to manage this. I need to get them out of the screen so that they're not disrupting whatever is happening. And so just thinking about that pressure people can put on themselves. And so you all talking about forgiveness, letting go of some things. Those are messages I hope people will hear during this pandemic, and particularly at a place like UNC, where we see a lot of perfectionism amongst our students. That is a lesson, I think, to learn. I try to think of positive things. I try to think of, in this time, what are some other things I might take and be grateful for, even if this is a difficult moment. So things like, I've never had the opportunity to work remotely before. And so I've worked remotely at times from, say, my parents' house. And then I get to do work during the day, but can still spend some time with them, even more time than I might normally. And so I try to look for those little silver linings, even in this difficult moment. And I think part of what people can also take is, again, what can we be grateful for that maybe we've overlooked previously? Or what could we change that maybe before seemed to work okay, but can eventually get us in trouble? And we know as therapists, perfectionism will get you in trouble eventually, because we're human beings. We have so many flaws. We can't even talk about them all on this podcast. And so eventually you're going to explode that whole myth of perfection. And so this is a time for people to really work on letting go of that and there is a do the best you can. And I think if we show up and give it the best we have, most people will appreciate that, and most things will go well and fine. And we can support each other in that of saying, Joe, or you saying in a moment, I needed to do this, I needed to forgive myself in that way, gives me permission to do it, gives other people permission to do it. And that's even part of why we were having this episode to talk about parenting, was I hope people might hear that message of, it's hard to parent on the best day ever in the history of the world. So in a pandemic, Jo is joining us from a completely different location because of internet concerns and all the rest of it. So flexibility, let it go, giving ourselves forgiveness and grace. These are just important things. So there's that I'm thinking about. And so if I think about the pressures students are bringing up in this time, part of it is accepting that piece of things, and accepting what that may mean for their work, and accepting to communicate, because what I've also been hearing is a number of stories, and it can be for undergrads, but it can be for grad students too, that there have been a lot of professors who have been very understanding in this process, and who will give some extra time on things, have been very helpful in understanding. And I really appreciate, I almost wish I had knew who they were and could kind of reach out. And I hope the students are expressing thanks, because it's not even one time that I've heard of that. I have heard that story several times from students that I've been interacting with since this pandemic, of the ways that their professors and instructors have been very helpful at taking some pressure off when it was hard to get an assignment done, or a student is beating themselves up because they're not performing at the level they are accustomed to. And the ways that our professors and instructors at UNC have been really gracious in that, and really helpful, helping people think things through, and helping people to calm, and helping people to not get into such a guilt spiral with that. So that's some of what I've been hearing with students, and really been happy to hear about the professors being really supportive.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, I've been sitting with hearing about your godson, and thinking of the seniors, and just how the graduating seniors this past spring had a very different experience, both undergrad and even our high school graduates, of living through a pandemic. And so thinking about acknowledging the loss, acknowledging that, this is different, and this is, like you were saying, this is hard, this may not have been what I was prepared for, right? And can we hold multiple things as true? And I think that's been helpful in parenting during this pandemic as well. So Jo, I'll give you a chance to speak to how you've managed to sort of hold both as true. But I like what you were saying earlier about what's been nice about it is like finding the joy and having a little bit more time with your daughter, because Anthony and I have talked in the past, and one of the gifts of this time is having a little bit more time, slower mornings. For instance, before pre-COVID, there's pre and post-COVID in my mind. Pre-COVID, my mornings were really, really busy and rushed. And that was our norm, right? Because I get out the door, and I commute. So there's like a window of time that I've got to get in there. And now it's a little bit more slow, and I'm able to spend a little bit more time, teaching, and also getting my daughter ready for school. And so, there's some hard stuff. It is hard being in the house all the time, and not necessarily having the things that I usually do to cope. So I guess I have two things I want to say. One is that Anthony has really been helpful, though, in reminding me of just getting outside. I think I hit a wall a few weeks ago where I was just like, how have we been doing this for 6 months? Like, this can't keep going on. And I was really pessimistic and down. And one of the things that he sort of gently encouraged for not just me, but other staff was just, getting outside. In the moment, I kind of was like, oh, yeah. But then I started just getting out, even for 20, 30 minutes of just walking around. And I can tell you it has been helpful for energy, for helping me kind of just see things a little bit differently, for finding a little bit of joy in like, hey, you are home, you're safe, you have a home to be in, when so many people have lost things during this pandemic. So that's the one point I wanted to make, is that I think there is something about changing your perspective and looking at it from multiple angles, and not just what you've lost, but can there be some things that are gained? And then I'm curious with a 2-year-old what that looks like, what are some maybe fun rituals or things that you're able to do now with Eleanor that maybe you weren't able to do before?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm thinking too about, Anthony had me reflecting about the modeling of sort of imperfection and being kind to yourself that we're able to do as therapists. And it sounds like professors are doing that a little bit more now too, and I'm thinking about just some space in these relationships that sometimes can feel really professional and constricted in some ways, and how self-disclosure for me has changed with clients. And I think also I've talked to clients who's like, oh, my professor's got their kids at home, right? And like, but really in a similar to you talking about our former intern of like, oh, that's really fun. I get to see that they have a kid, and sort of just the humanness has been, I think, a really beautiful thing. And I'm glad to hear that people are feeling supported by faculty. And I've heard from grad students about faculty being more flexible about dissertation, and it's a funny place for grad students to be, because they're like, wait, but shouldn't I do way more, and they're saying, give yourself permission to, you don't have to go in all these directions, and this is an extraordinary time that we're living in, and you can cut this back, and they're a little bit unsure about taking that on. And I think that makes sense, and I'm sure undergrads are feeling that way too. But I hope this does, they're seeing their therapist at CAPS in their home spaces, right? They're learning more about us, but it's okay. It's a good thing. It's a modeling thing. And,
yeah.
So I think about that just as well. And in terms of ritual, I totally agree about getting outside. We spend a lot of time outside in the yard. At the beginning of the pandemic, I went and bought a slide and a pool, a little blow-up pool, like these things, because I was thinking, how are we going to be inside all this time? And so it's nice to go, to go on evening walks regularly, and also have some slower mornings, and just time to not, I feel like my mental to-do list, I don't know if it's shorter or I'm just more flexible about it, or like a little bit more like all these things are going to happen, right? And we've got a little bit more breathing room, not having to do the commute, and maybe it's allowed me to engage in more noticing and feeling more present with what's happening with my daughter in the moment, and sort of noticing, just how curious she is, things that she's learning. Pre-pandemic, I wouldn't have been able to have a pinpoint on when she started using a certain word or a certain phrase. And I feel like during the pandemic, we've been able to, in the evenings, when my sister was living with us, the three of us would sit and sort of talk about what happened that day, and like, oh, now she's talking in this way. And I think the sort of tiredness of routine before pandemic and driving, and just all the different pieces made it like, I wanted to notice those things more because I had less opportunity, but I also feel like I was less able to see them. Mm-hmm. So I think even just not even like, it doesn't even feel like there's specific things that we do, but there's just more room to be present for whatever kind of is happening, and to let her lead. When she was home for 4 months, we had to let her lead. It's sort of like, I've got meetings, but she's in charge. Like, if she's banging on this glass door, like, I'm gonna open the door, like she's gonna come in, or she's gonna play the music toy or whatever it is. I think just about 2 weeks ago, public playgrounds opened in Durham again, so that has been a huge joy, because my daughter's daycare is reopened, but they close at 2:30, so it's a shorter day. So we've got to figure out what to do for many hours before bed. So being able to play again, and give her opportunities to be connected to other kids, and but it does, but there are a lot of gifts in this time, and I do feel like what it's going to be like to transition back, I don't even know. And wondering about, Anthony, you were speaking to like things that we used to do or hold on to that maybe we're going to make some shifts around. I am really curious for students and for us and for everybody, kind of what are we going to want to keep doing that we've learned to do for ourselves and each other in the pandemic, and is there going to be institutional flexibility kind of at the university to allow for that? And I think people probably are maybe getting a better sense of what works for them, what they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we're having the conversation Erinn was mentioning about, and you all were talking about getting outside, what that can mean for people, just want to plug that we have a group we call Nature RX, which is a group that's very much about getting out into nature, how that can relate to positive mental health. And there's a lot of studies that I'm not going to go into, but there's a lot of evidence for what nature can mean for us as human beings and how that can promote really sort of positive, higher level, stronger mental health in people. And so that's a group I want to mention because I think that could be an opportunity anyone listening to this could get connected to that could be really helpful, particularly in this time where we're spending a lot of time inside and on screens to do school and work and those kind of things. And so the Nature RX group could be a really good resource for people. And I also want to mention that at CAPS, we have a parent support group. It's not running in this current semester, but the hope is for it to have it run in the spring. And so anyone listening to this, again, that could be something to contact CAPS around and to get some support. If you identify as a parent and that's something that you're dealing with, that could be a really great area. And part of us wanting to do this podcast is we also know that just creates another thing that presses on your time. It can be hard to then take the time for yourself to be able to focus on some other things around mental health. And you were mentioning earlier, Erinn, I think you were asking, I don't know how many parents we've been seeing, student parents we've been seeing. And I don't think I've seen a ton. And some of that is Carolina has a more traditional population than some other places I've been. So I think there's just fewer parents. But I know when I've worked with parents in the past, it's in some ways what we've been talking about of a flexibility we've had to have even in our sessions of maybe sometimes we had a child in the session with us and join us because we say, okay, they're young enough so they won't understand everything we're doing and they can be okay playing by themselves over here so it won't be disruptive, or we don't get into depth this session because they're here with us so we don't go into trauma or anything like that. We just check in and support you in a different kind of way. Or maybe kids have to wait in the waiting room. So it was always important to think about a flexibility in the times that I've worked with student parents because childcare is not always there for them and other kinds of things. And so, yeah, I would expect some of that's happening during this pandemic. It might make it hard to reach out to CAPS for certain things just to find that time. And so I'll just mention kind of that can be a time to look at the CAPS website. We have a self-help section on there that could still give people a lot of helpful resources that they could go through, even if it seems like right now isn't the time to connect to some form of therapy, say. And then Jo has been one of our staff instrumental in our work on our Retrain Your Brain workshop and putting that online. That was something we were doing in person. In COVID, we've transitioned it to online with videos and other things to present the material. And that is also something that can be accessed through our website and a really great resource for people. It pulls a lot of information from similar to, we have an anxiety-based group, so it pulls some information from that. It pulls in some skills around emotional management, distress tolerance kinds of things. And so it has a lot of really helpful skills that people can also utilize. So thinking about that, thinking about resources parents might be able to access when they have a sense they won't be able to devote the time or energy to do, say, an individual group therapy experience. There's still ways they could get resource through CAPS that could be helpful to them. So was there anything we haven't asked you, Jo, or you haven't gotten to talk about you would love to tell people? Or
let's see. I guess the other thing I'll say briefly is talk about self-compassion and think about just talking about groups so we offer a self-compassion mindfulness group at CAPS. We offer 3 sections of it a semester. It's really popular. Students get a lot out of it. I think 2 of the 3 groups for this semester are full, but also that, self-compassion has been really helpful to me during this time, having a practice of thinking about what do I need in this moment and can I offer that to myself? Can I take a pause to offer that to myself? I think that we're all really good at offering kindness and care and understanding to the people that we love, to our friends, to, putting it outward, it can be really challenging to turn that inward. And I think there are some really accessible ways to do that through learning about self-compassion. And so encourage folks to consider that group in the future, and also know that the self-compassion resources are really widely available on the web, and there are guided meditations and exercises and things that I think can be really helpful. But it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. I mean, this pandemic is truly this global collective experience, right? It's pretty easy to access the common humanity piece of not being alone. And certainly we're all contending with it and struggling with it and experiencing it in different ways. But that sometimes the feelings can be really similar. What we might need can be really similar. So encouraging folks to connect to that sense of common humanity when you're suffering or struggling, and offering yourself some words of kindness or what you might need in the moment has been really, really helpful to me. And I've talked to lots of students who have gotten a lot out of just learning how to do that. And it's hard, but it's really helpful.
Yeah. So glad that you thought to share that, because it really related to what we were just talking about and what we have been talking about flexibility, forgiveness, and self-compassion, how that can fit into that. And so I think that brings us to a spot. And Erinn and Jo, I don't know if you know about this, but we like to finish up our episodes with a section that we're calling Just Stop It. So just some sort of message we want to deliver to people in maybe a more blunt way, or more sort of, but while being encouraging of just stop it. Just stop with doing something, with approaching something a certain way that we know can get people in trouble, lead to more pain, more distress. And so I don't know if I have one in my head right now, Erinn or Jo, but I'm curious for you as I say that. Do you have a just stop it to share with our listeners as we get ready to close out the pod today?
I'm thinking. I mean, I feel like I do. Erinn, do you have one?
Well, I was thinking, Jo, of the idea, and Anthony touched on it too, of like holding yourself to this kind of impossible standard of perfection. I've got to do it right and do it well and do it, just perfect. And I think just stop it with thinking that, you've got to do everything perfect. This is a pandemic that we're all living through. Offer yourself some compassion and some grace. Get outside if you can. So maybe just stop holding yourself to this really impossible standard of perfection. And that if we layer on the idea of parenting to that too, the idea of, yes, our children might remember this time, but hopefully they'll remember the time we spent with them, and how we kind of calmed their fears and helped them, and we're present. I love the idea, Jo, of like in acknowledging like the presence and how competing energies at any time can really make it hard to stay in the moment. And so, yeah, I would say, as I was listening to all of us talk, but I was thinking about just stop holding myself to this impossible standard of perfection, and just be mindful, be present, be in the moment, and offer ourselves some compassion.
I really love that, Erinn. It makes me think of the tyranny of shoulds. I feel like, folks are holding themselves to how they were, even how they thought they needed to be before the pandemic. And I'm really hopeful that people can slow down and notice if this is creating some space for them, that there are other ways to engage in your work, other ways to be with yourself, other ways to talk to yourself, talk with folks who've developed new hobbies or things that they felt passionate about, and sort of giving themselves permission to do those things because they don't have access to some of the stuff that they would normally do, and the opportunity to maybe learn a little bit more about yourself and what you do really love and enjoy, and doing those things more unabashedly. The school stuff will happen. You'll get it done.
Yeah, as I listened to you both talk, and Erinn, as you shared that, just stop it with the listeners and viewers of this, it made me think we might need a sequel to this particular podcast that leads in, because I'm thinking about how much perfectionism can play out for parents as you just said, how much it can particularly play out for moms and what you can hear from that of the pressure that people can feel. You're both professional women and are also navigating being mothers at the same time. And so there's a lot of pressure that can be wrapped up in those roles and identities and ways that people can want to be perfect, and also what that encouragement to just stop it can not only help with them, but also what it can teach to children. Of if we teach that perfectionism is a way to move through life, what does that set children up for? And we see some of the distress at the other end of that, because again, it's not possible. And so I think I like that. That's what I was thinking of as you were sharing that just stop it. So who knows? We might need to, much like Hollywood likes to make a sequel to everything to cash in on that money. I don't know that we're making any money, but maybe we'll cash in and do a sequel to this particular podcast. But it's been a real pleasure getting to have Jo on today to welcome her to the pod and get to talk a bit about parenting, her journey, and just really again, great to get to see you today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was so fun. So nice to talk with both of you. Yeah.
Thank you.